Now that we've had a chance to learn a few basic commands and also how to explore data in Stata, we're going to take a bit of a detour. We're going to learn some best practices. In particular, we're going to learn about good directory structures and the benefits of using do files. Then we're going to come back and learn how to import different types of data. So these are just my own set of best practices that have come from my own experiences and advisors that I've had if I've been working as a research assistant and they've had preferences that I thought were good, that sort of thing. Very first, directory structure. So I cannot emphasize this enough because my directory structure used to be just terrible, and it's generally true of most people. There are a lot of grad students who have terrible directory structure, and it results in like just a mess of files and things getting lost, and it's confusing, especially if you ever have a co-author. They're not going to know what to do with things. It may not be obvious at first. Even in your honors thesis, you may do something that only requires a few files, and so it may not seem like it makes a lot of sense to you to have a number of different folders, but getting into the practice now is very good habit, and I promise you that you will thank me like 5 years from now if you get into the habit now. So like I said, any decent research project is going to have dozens if not hundreds of files, and you really want to organize these well. So for example, you're going to have raw data that you got from somewhere, downloaded from somewhere, or whatever else. Then you're going to clean it up, and you're going to have cleaned data files. And then you're going to have do files, which we'll get into in just a few minutes, which do different things, which clean things, which explore your data, which run your analysis. Then you're going to have log files. Then you're going to have output files. And you want to have all of this really well organized so it's easy to find and easy to access. So always use multiple folders to organize your Stata projects. And I'm going to force you guys to create a data or sort of folder structure now, a directory structure that that you can use as a template in the future. And you don't have to, obviously, but you have to do it for me now, and so it'll make it easier for you to do it for yourselves. At a minimum, within every single overarching project folder, I'm going to want you to have a folder for your data, another folder for your do files, another folder for your log files, and another folder for your output files. This is at a minimum. You may have a number more. And then each of these folders themselves will have a number of different folders within them. So I want you to create a directory structure as shown here. And I'm going to put this large. You can call it whatever you want, project directory, whatever you want your project to be called. You can call it practice project or whatever else. Do whatever you like there. If you're going to have multiple words in the name, I want you to use an underscore to connect them. But after that, I want you to use these exact words to title your other folders. Now, I put them all in caps here just to make them big, but I actually want you to put them all in small letters, no capital letters in these names. But I want you to create a directory structure that looks exactly like this. All right. Now that we've got our directory structure all set up, let's move on to do files. So do files are going to be how I want you to do pretty much everything from now on. Like I said earlier, the command line can be used to do basic things like test your code or very preliminary data exploration, or to, for example, type like help summarize, help describe, and you get your nice little help files. But other than that, those few things, I want you to use do files for everything. So do files, in a general sense, just make your life a lot easier. So they're going to make it way easier for you to fix coding errors rather than saying like, oh, I was typing a bunch of things into here and oh shoot, I did something wrong. Now I have to go back and rerun all that code and find out, wait, which one of those commands did I typed this? Oh, was that the wrong one? Oh no, that was the one. Okay, I got to fix that. Rather than doing something like that, you just have it all written out in front of you and you can easily just change one line, go back and fix it. It also ensures your work can be reproduced. And this is a big thing, right? Like, you do not want to be putting out research that not even you can reproduce. Everybody should be able to reproduce your results given your data and your code. And people should be able to look at your code and ensure that it's actually doing what you say it's doing and it's not doing something else. So for reproducibility, for fixing coding errors, just for transparency, you need to use do files. And honestly, for yourselves, like if we do a bunch of stuff today and you don't put it in a do file, and then I say, let's pick up where we left off tomorrow morning, you're going to have to go back and do everything, type it out all again, and make sure it's right if you don't have it in a do file. But if you have it in a do file, you can just hit run, and it'll do it. So we want to organize our do files well. Remember, we had here a whole directory just below our main directory. We had a whole folder for our do files. So we're going to use subdirectories. We're going to put info banners, I guess for lack of a better term, at the top of our do files and at the beginning of sections. And we're going to make some useful notes for ourselves and for others. We should also note that do files do not autosave. And if you have been working on a do file for any extended period of time and for whatever reason it closes and you haven't saved it, that is going to be incredibly frustrating to you. Chances are it's going to happen all of you at least once, and you're going to remember, shoot, I have to always save my do files. But just keep that in mind. They don't autosave. So before we open the do file editor, just keep in mind every do file should have a minimum, an info banner or a preamble at the beginning. That includes the title of your project and a description, or the do file and a description of what this particular do file does. The author, generally that's going to be you, but maybe you'll look at somebody else's. The date that you last modified it, so you can know, okay, like, is this an old file? Have I actually got like a newer version somewhere else? Or, have I, is this just like completely useless, or is this actually like what I want to be using right now? Maybe you want to include the date that you originally wrote it. Maybe you want to include some notes in this preamble. It's up to you. You're also going to want, in general, to log everything. So you want to log open and close, except for your settings do file. And we'll talk about the settings do file, but that's the only one you don't really need a log for. Everything else you do. You also want sort of a banner or just like labels, descriptions for each section that you have in your do file, and descriptive titles for your subsections. And we'll see what this means. But let's go to Stata and let's click right here, the new do file editor. You don't have to open do files like this. Once they're saved, you can just double click on them, and if Stata isn't open, they'll open Stata and then open themselves. But this is what it looks like, and it's essentially a text editor at this point, just whatever. But you have a few different options with it. You can, importantly, execute a part or all of it at once. And if you tell Stata to do that, then it's going to be like running all those commands over here in Stata. And that's why they're useful. So keep in mind, as we're working with this, Stata thinks everything is a command unless it's sort of coded otherwise. So if I did this and I ran it, Stata is going to be like, well, that's a command, but I don't recognize that command. So if you don't want to do that, I'll show you a few different ways that you can mark text for yourself so that Stata won't think it's a command and won't try to run it. But you need to keep that in mind. You should also keep in mind that do file execution can be interrupted by unmarked non-commands. So if I had a few real commands like sum price, list mpg, this is a new section, and then sum mpg. If I tried to run this, well, Stata did the first two commands. It summed price and then it listed miles per gallon, but then this is a new section, and I didn't flag that as a comment or a note, so Stata interrupted running the do file, and we didn't actually do anything below that. So keep that in mind. Any text that is properly coded as a comment, so it's not going to try to run it as a command, it's going to appear in green, which is nice for you, so you'll know if it's been properly flagged or not. Yeah, Stata is going to ignore properly coded comments when running do files. So ways that you can leave comments. You can use a star. If you star something, then Stata is going to ignore everything in that row after the star. This is, provided it's not in there as part of, say, a multiplication command or something like that. Also, if you use 2 slashes, so you can do this at the beginning of a row, or you can actually have commands in a row, and then if you want to add notes exactly in that row, you can include the 2 slashes, and Stata will read everything before the 2 slashes on that row and execute it, but not anything on that row after the 2 slashes. Or finally, you can use this slash star way of doing things, and then for multiple rows, it will just ignore things until it finds star slash. And before we get started, just a few more things to note that will make perhaps more sense later. Slash slash is not the same as slash slash slash. So if you use slash slash slash, Stata is going to treat the next row as a part of the first row. So if you have a long command and you don't want it stretching over, here past this line, which is sort of about where most people would read their do files to. If you don't want a command stretching all the way over here, so in order to see all of it, you have to scroll over, but it's all one command, so you have to have it all on one line in Stata's syntax, then you can interrupt the line, so to speak, by putting slash slash slash, and Stata will treat anything on the next line as part of the line that has the slash slash slash. Even better than doing this is to use to essentially change the delimiter to something. Generally, I use a semicolon instead of having a carriage return, which is an enter. Like that's what normally is considered a delimiter for Stata, so it thinks it's a new line. But if you do something like this, and we'll see it later, then everything after that you type will be considered to be on one line. Even if it's on multiple lines, it'll be considered to be on one line until it sees a semicolon. And then after that, you can say, okay, now change it back to a carriage return as the delimiter. We'll use that later. Don't worry too much about that now if that doesn't make sense. But it just is sort of a nicer presentation for yourself rather than having a bunch of slash 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 interrupting commands. Okay. When we're creating do files, we're always going to want to include in our main do folder, remember our directory structure, we're going to want to include a settings do file. This settings do file is going to have a project directory global macro. This is going to be one of those few occasions when you're going to want to use a global. And globals are not going to be forgotten once you finish running your do file the way a local will. Of course, so quick aside, when we were typing locals into the command line, Stata would then, after we hit enter, it would still remember those and we could call them. If you type them into a do file like this, like local age 3 di age, if I say run that, Stata has looked at that and it's run it. But now if I type di age, well, rather than age, let's do a different one. Well, okay, you'll see this. It's not going to know it because we cleared that out earlier, and Stata does not remember, after we've run a do file, any of the locals that have been defined in the do file, even though it did in the command line. But if we had defined a global here, then even after finishing running it, Stata would remember it. You're also, in your settings file, you can include, for example, any standard customizations. If you have, like, I want all my graphs to look like this, and I have a few special settings, you can include that sort of thing, or anything else that's going to be true for your project as a whole. You can include it in your settings file. You're also going to want to include a master do file, which will run all of your do files in order. Obviously, you don't necessarily use this every time you run your project. In fact, you may very rarely run your master do file, especially if you have some big data cleaning at the beginning of your project that takes a long time. You don't want to do it all over again, especially every time you run your analysis. But having them set out in order in a master do file will help you be aware of which thing you have to run first, because sometimes the order in which you run your projects or your do files can affect your project a lot. So you generally do want to have a master do file, which itself just has a bunch of, like, do the cleaning, that would be a comment, and then you'd have do, and then your do files for your cleaning, and then another section, do the analysis, and then do whatever analysis files that you have. Okay, so we aren't going to bother putting a log command in our settings do file. We are going to want to start with a preamble and an info banner. So let's, you can do whatever you like for this. I'm using the star, and then you can use a bunch of stars. You can use, like, the // you can use the star backslash or backslash star. You can do whatever you want. But settings. This file contains the settings for our project. You can author, your own name, date last modified. What's the date today? June 25th, 2019. You can include, if you want, like, date first created, for example, June 25th, 2019. I don't typically include that, but you can. You can also include, like, notes. These are some useful notes. We know they're useful because we said so. Then you can end it. Now, you can do however you like for your subsections. I'm only going to include one section right now, but you can include multiple sections if you wish. I am going to use a little star space and then type whatever the name of my section is, just to let me know what's going on. Define the project directory global macro. Global. You can call it whatever you want. I'm going to call it proj_dir. You can call it ABC123. I don't care. Probably use something professional in case other people look at it, but it's up to you. And then you want to know what is the actual path to your main directory. So you don't want to set your do file subdirectory as the main directory, because you want to be able to call things out of your data folders or save things to your output folders or whatever. But whatever your main directory is, oops, that's not right. Sorry. Whatever your main directory is, I want you to create something that goes there. So I'm going to, for convenience, set mine to this folder. And how I'm going to go into that folder, and so this should be whatever you called your main project directory. You can see, so when I created this, I had a bunch of other things going on. I would say that this is an old directory structure for me. This is not, even this project, I have an updated version of this where it's much nicer. This is not very nice. Even though I've got a bunch of folders, it's highly problematic. So you guys learn from my mistakes and do not, for example, include a bunch of other stuff in here. And I'll show you something which is bad. If you look in, look how nasty that looks. So many files. So you don't want to do that. But go to your main directory and then say, just pick a folder, go to properties or however you want to do it. Get the location, and then include it in quotation marks. So you don't necessarily have to include it in quotation marks, but because I've got this space right here, again, this is an old project. In an updated version of this project, I do not have a space, I have an underscore. But because I've got that space, you need to have the quotation marks for Stata to know that this is the file path. Otherwise, it's just going to end when it sees a space. It's not going to know that it should keep going. Okay, so we've done that, and now let's save this. So wherever you're going to save these, they should be in your do folder. I am not going to actually save this because I've already got one of these settings files in my do folder. But you should save it as settings.do in your do folder.
Should we save it like analysis, build, explore, or just in the...
Just save the settings do file in your do folder. So you'll see here, so now I've opened it. So this is an old, I created this last year. I don't have author in here, maybe I should. But it's the same sort of deal. So this is the settings file that I have. And I only need it once in that do folder. But from now on, every time I do anything in this project, I'm going to want to start the project, start anything I do, by opening the settings do file and running it. So you can run that. And then from now on, globals are not called the same as macros. Globals are called by putting a $sign in front of the name of the global. So in this case, I call it box_dir. Again, I told you guys to use proj_dir, but whatever you want to call it. If you want to then call that macro, you simply $sign the name of that macro, that global macro, and then continue on. So if I had subfolders here, I could say do. You would say proj_dir. I have box_dir. But I could do that. And now I'd already run the settings file, so it knew what the global was. But by doing that, I just ran the settings file again. But I used this to call it. So where I said $boxdir, and you do $projdir. But anytime I want to do anything now, it's going to know I can just call that global. And then anything else I do in my project is going to start from that main folder. Now, the reason why you want to do this, you don't have to. You could, for example, set the directory in every single do file you have. And to do that, you would do cd space and then the project directory or the directory that you're trying to set for this particular file, and you could enter it, and then that's going to reset the working directory for Stata. The reason that you do not want to do that, and again, remember, this is best practices. The reason you do not want to do that is because if you ever change anything, say your laptop dies and you've backed up all your folders and files on Google Drive or something, and now you've got a new laptop and you download it, and for whatever reason, there's a slightly different name assigned to something. For example, I don't know why, and I'm sure I can change it, but I haven't bothered to. So all of my folders have Justy instead of Justin. I don't know why Windows did that, but it did. But that's a change from my old laptop. Now, when I had bad practices before and I set the directory on every do file, I had to go back and change the directory to the new one in every single do file. Otherwise, they wouldn't run. And that's just a real hassle once you start having more than one or two do files. So in general, run your settings file. It's got your project directory there, and then you can just always call it. And then you only have to change it once. If you ever have to change your project directory or you share it with somebody else or anything like that, all they have to do is change the project directory once in their settings file, and then it applies for the entire project. What else? So I've said all of that. Yeah, and we didn't obviously put anything else in the settings folder, but if you have other project-wide modifications like formatting, you can do that too. Okay, so now let's start a simple data cleaning do file. So this is going to be a new do file that we're going to create.
Could we see the settings do file again, just real quickly?
For sure. So that's mine. Again, you guys should have whatever you want yours to be called. I called it boxdir because this is it's a project about box stores, but you can do as you wish. Okay, we'll have to move on just for timing. So, how are we going to start this? I want you to start by writing capture log close. If you want to know what capture does, you can always type help capture. I'm going to leave that to you. Then we want to include log using. Now, we've just said that we were going to call it proj.dir. We don't have to, but whatever we called our global macro, you want to call that, and then log/build or BLD, I think. How did we have our structure earlier? Just checking. Build. We had all of it typed out. Okay, so build clean CLN, and then this is just going to be a test.txt. Really, whatever you have in here, that should be the same. Just for good practices, you should in general call it the same thing as whatever you call the do file. So if we're calling it test, then I would call this do file test.do when I saved it. But I would obviously thoughtfully choose what I was actually going to call it, and I would call the do file the same, or the log file the same thing. After that, you want to type comma text replace. So it's going to replace anything that you already have there by that name. After you do that, include a preamble. It's just as we just did. Oops. So you can say title or description or whatever. This file is a test do file. Yeah, as you wish. Author Justin Wiltshire. Date last modified today. And again, anytime you do make changes, you're going to want to change that so that you know for yourself what's going on. And that's all I'm going to include there. Now let's call the subsection, the first subsection, load the data. Just say something descriptive so that you and other people in the future know what you did here. Because sometimes you are going to look at a do file and you're going to be like, what? Like, I don't remember that command, or what was I trying to do with that? And if you don't have some description, then it's going to be a lot of extra time for you to try to catch yourself back up to speed. So let's sysuse auto.dta clear. And maybe we want to say restrict the data. Now we've already explored our auto data. If we hadn't, we may want to actually load the data and in our command line do a few explorations, right? But say we already know our data really well, and we know that we want to restrict it. So say we know that we want to keep only if the price is greater than $10,000. Now this is an error. This should say and foreign equals 0. So this and, it's one of two things that you're going to use, and or statements. Or is going to be this bar right here. If we used or, then Stata would say, well, we're going to keep it if foreign is 0 or if price is greater than $10,000. Here it's got to be both, so it's much more restrictive. Then we might want to say summarize the price data. Sum price D. Maybe we want to close the log file now. Log close. Now we haven't saved this, remember, so if we accidentally close it, we're going to have to type it all over again. So maybe you want to save this in one of your do file folders temporarily. It's up to you. I'm actually going to change it so that it will run because I loaded boxdir as my global. And now you can run this. So I think it's going to give me an error for my log because I have not set up that directory structure properly. I might have in the past. But anyway, it ran through all this. It loaded the data. It restricted the data, so it kept only a few observations. Right? We only have 8 observations left we can see. It restricted it by deleting 66 observations. Then it gave us the summary statistics in detail, and finally it closed it. Now check your log folder for this test .txt log file. Go ahead and do that. So the actual folder that you created. See if it's there. Double click on it. What's there? Oh, we've got a log of everything that just ran. Cool. So, a few questions for you guys here. In what way do we restrict the sample? Well, that's easy. We already talked about it. Foreign was 0 and the price was over $10,000. There were not that many cars that were domestics over $10,000. How many obs were left in the sample? Again, we can see from here 8. You could also look down here and see that there were 8. How is the 50th percentile of price calculated? What do you guys think here? So we've got 8 observations, and if you list price here, none of the prices are this 12,481.5. So how is that calculated? How does Stata calculate that 50th percentile price? Maybe it'll be easier if I do this. Sort price, list price. Now we've sorted the data from smallest to largest price. So how did we get 1241.5 for the 50th percentile? Well, the answer is it took the average of these two here. And you can test that by going DI 11,497 plus 13,466 divided by 2. It's 1241.5, 1241.5. So just because Stata is telling you, well, this is the median value, doesn't mean that value actually exists in your Stata data. So just be aware of that. We already checked the log folder. We opened the log file. Okay, now let's erase it. So sometimes you're going to do something, you're going to be like, I don't want that there anymore. That file is just wasting space and it's messing up my folder. So if that's the case, then we can just type erase. I'm going to do box dir. You're going to do proj dir, whatever you called it. Log build clean test.text. Text. Oh, not found. Log build clean text. Oh, test. That's why. So Control R will bring that back. Test.text. There we go. So we erased it. Now we look in the folder, and it's gone.